Warbonds are the lifeblood of Helldivers 2. Each one of these grants you special unlockable gameplay and cosmetic items that offer unique and powerful ways to dominate out on the battlefield. And while the free Helldivers Mobilize Warbond is an amazing way to build up your arsenal, the premium and legendary Warbonds have some of the most special items that this game has to offer. But these are going to cost you your precious super credits, which begs the question, which of these Warbonds are the best and which are the worst to spend your super credits on? Dr. Pooplove here, and that's what I'd like to find out. In this video, I have ranked each of the premium and legendary Warbonds on a tier list, with S being the best and Poopator being the worst. And with this, I will be focusing on what each Warbond has to offer in terms of gameplay only, so that I can help you make a determination as to which Warbonds are worth picking up first and which are worth picking up last. Starting with the absolute worst Warbond this game has to offer, the Force of Law Warbond. Now on paper, you would think this one can't be that bad, and there are some good things here, as with all Warbonds, but in practice, this one is pretty poop. And a big reason for that is I think it doesn't offer much in the way of lethality. And while I think it was largely designed with the intention to try to have your back, I think it largely falls flat. But one thing that does have your back, especially when it comes to sleep, is today's sponsor, Manta Sleep. Now Manta Sleep is known for their amazing sleep masks, like the Pro Mask or the Cool Mask, but they also have some amazing sleep accessories that have been helping me up my sleep game, like their white noise machine, which blocks out all noises with one simple click, allowing you to calmly drift into a gentle slumber. It also has some different modes and a timer, so you can have things just the way you like them. Manta Sleep also has this amazing Manta neck heating pad, which is super comfortable with great lasting heat and soothes your neck and shoulders so nicely. I even like to use this during the day to relax my muscles after a long time spent at the computer. And these are just some of the sleep accessories that Manta Sleep has to offer. They have so many different things that can help you get some well-deserved shut-eye. So what are you waiting for? Go to mantasleep.com to get your sleep mask and accessories today. Use my link or enter promo code POOPLOVE10 at checkout to get 10% off your next order. That's 10% off by clicking my link and entering POOPLOVE10 at checkout. Make sleeping easy with Manta Sleep. But now, back to the video. Okay, so for the Force of Law Warbond, you actually have a lot of things that can stun or shock the enemies. The AR-32 pacifier is an assault rifle which shoots medium armor penetrating stun rounds, and generally this is decent for stunning and stopping the enemies, but the low damage makes you feel like you're kind of just tickling them. I do find this good for the bots though, as the medium armor penetration is good on that front, and it is cool that this can stun a charger from the mouth. You also have the ballistic padding armor, which I find to be not that great and actually one of the worst. It gives resistance to chest damage and bleeding, which can be nice, but the significance of this is really kind of hard to feel. And resistance to explosive damage is good, but less than the fortified armor passive, which also gives you nice recoil reduction. So I don't really find many reasons to take the ballistic padding armor over that, unless you just care about aesthetics. You also have the Guard Dog K9 backpack, which is basically a drone with an arc blitzer on it, following you and shocking enemies. And this really seems like it would be super strong and able to completely wreck enemies and have your back, but I found that doesn't fire as frequently as I want it to, and it often doesn't really even seem to target the most immediate threats, and for that it just makes it feel quite unreliable. You also have the Urchin throwable here, which is this sticky bomb that sends a pulsing stun to enemies for a little while, and that can be good at stopping bigger enemies like the charger, but it doesn't really have any damage. You need to follow that up with something else, and since the effects of this don't seem to last that long, you have to be able to follow up really quickly, and ultimately it just doesn't really feel like it's doing enough. I feel like if you want to go for something sticky, something like the thermite is just going to be a better option 9 out of 10 times. Now, the cherry on top of this poop sundae is the Stun Pods booster, which is just really poopy. These turn all your Hell Pods into stun weapons, which are able to stop anyone in the blast radius, but that also includes yourself. And that can make for picking up support weapons and backpacks super difficult. You can negate this if you time a dive, but that means you have to be paying attention to the drop timer, and that's just kind of annoying. I can see this though as a bit of a decent option if you're using sentries, as you can throw those down towards a group of enemies and it can freeze everyone around it, giving it a chance to set itself up and begin dishing out damage. Now, even the poopiest of Warbonds have something good, and the saving grace of this Warbond is really the De-Escalator, which is an arc grenade launcher with rounds reload that lobs powerful stun grenades that also do damage to the enemies. I really like this on the bot front as it stops a lot of enemies' attacks and just allows me to hurt them. That being said, it's not going to be enough to really save this Warbond from its fate. While stun can be nice, I feel like stagger and gas are both better ways to keep enemies off you, and in this Warbond there just really isn't much to offer in the way of actually killing enemies, meaning you're probably going to want to get many of the other Warbonds first before you get this. So yeah, this is a poop hater tier. I would get this last. But let's move on to the next Warbond on this list, and by the way, I'm ordering this in order of worst to best, and really when I'm doing that, I'm thinking of which Warbond I would pick up last and making my way all the way up to the Warbond that I would pick first if I had to start over from scratch. So yeah, this next one really is the next worst Warbond, and that is the Masters of Ceremony. And this Warbond is actually so close to the Force of Law Warbond that on any given day I will actually switch these two and make this one last. And really the reason for that is there are a lot of things in this Warbond that largely, as the name suggests, are ceremonial and really made for Helldivers cosplay, and so while aesthetically this is probably one of the best, it's not even close when it comes to gameplay. You have the R2 Amendment, which is a light armor penetrating, high damage marksman rifle with a bayonet attached, and this actually isn't too bad. It's able to snap to enemies quickly, it's got burst and semi-fire patterns, and it is a decent option if you want to melee enemies that are close. But this feels fairly similar to the Diligence marksman rifle from the free Helldivers Mobilized Warbond, and the bayonet I feel isn't really enough of a game changer. You also have the reinforced epaulets armor passive, which is pretty decent mostly in that it gives you the fastest increase of your reload speed for your primaries, and that can help with slower reloading weapons like the Tenderizer or the Eruptor, but this also includes some melee damage and limb protection, although not as good as some of the other passives that offer the same thing. This is kind of a jack of all trades type passive that can serve you well, really depending on your loadout. Now you have the Saber melee weapon, which is okay for a melee weapon, especially because it does a sweeping motion rather than a jab, but I will say that melee is just not something I have found to be too useful in this game, other than just saving you some ammo for your primary. May just be the way I play, but I feel like I would much rather have almost anything else in my secondary slot. Of course, who can't forget the most ceremonial thing of all, the one true flag, which calls down the flag of Super Earth itself, allowing you to wave it around and salute it. Now, I actually like this addition to the game because it is a reminder to just have fun, and it does actually kind of feel like it does boost your morale a little bit. Whenever you see one of these in your match, it does kind of give you a little bit of a psychological feeling of being able to lock in and do better. But I also feel like this was a missed opportunity to offer something cooler, like offering a small passive to players that are in the area, or when planting it into an enemy, causing them to undergo a slow death from bleeding. There really was a lot that could have been done here, and so it's just a bit disappointing that really nothing was. And really one of the reasons why I think ultimately this is a little bit of a better option than the Force of Law Warbond is the booster here. It's the sample scanner booster, which gives you a 15% chance to receive twice the samples upon sample pickup. Doesn't really feel like a lot, but that can help newer players who are on that sample grind. So it may be worth it, although I will say once you get to the point of unlocking all your spaceship upgrades, people care about samples much less. But as with all Warbonds, there is at least one really good thing here, and that is the pyrotechnic throwable, which is more than just fireworks. This covers an area with flames, but it also does some decent damage even to some larger enemies, being able to take out hulks and even factory striders. And it sort of feels like a hybrid between the incendiary grenade and a non-sticky thermite. Not to mention they do give you a lot of these. Now that's all good, but it's not going to be enough to really save this one. I do appreciate the Masters of Ceremony just in how much it leans into having fun with this game, but since we're judging this from a gameplay perspective, we are going straight poop hater on this one. And our next Warbond is actually another one that has great hell drip, but is not so great in terms of gameplay value, and that is the Truth Enforcers. Now this is weird to me because I think the gameplay stuff in here is good, but ultimately I don't think this is going to offer you much that is really going to significantly up your game, at least compared to the rest of the Warbonds on this list. The Halt Shotgun is perhaps the biggest standout here in that it offers an extremely unique gun that serves dual functions. It can stun and freeze light armored enemies in stun mode, which can be great for horde management. I really like this on the squid front, and I also like that it can freeze a charger head on if you shoot it in its mouth. But what adds to the specialness of this is that you can actually switch its mode and blast enemies with its medium flechette rounds, and that happens to be very strong. Now the switching mechanic is pretty cool. It leads to an interesting interplay as you can stun enemies with the stun and then switch to flechette for a good amount of damage, but we do have weapons in this game that can stun and do damage at the same time, so that does make this a little bit less appealing. Regardless, this is unique, and I do appreciate that this does bring some interesting strategy and versatility to the game. Another standout here is the Loyalist sidearm, which provides you with a pocket plasma charge-up weapon, essentially a mini purifier with all the benefits that plasma weapons have, and this is great especially versus the bots and versus the charger butts. Now, while great, it is limited in ammo, and so it won't provide as much impact as the other plasma primaries, but it is good if you don't want to have a plasma on your primary, but you do want some of that plasma going on. You also have the Reprimand, which is good, especially now that you can reduce its recoil through mods, but it's not much of an SMG in that it is two-handed, so it doesn't get the same perks as a lot of SMGs, and it's also pretty similar to another weapon we'll talk about from a much higher rated Warbond on this list, so I just don't find it to be an urgent pickup. So for the weapons, there's some interesting things here, but with the rest of this Warbond, you're probably not even going to use it at all. The Dead Sprint booster allows you to trade health for more stamina, which can be interesting at times, but it's highly likely to just annoy your teammates as it automatically drains your health and doesn't give you the option to toggle it on and off, and that makes you have to really monitor your stamina bar closely. You also have the Unflinching perk, which reduces pain wobble when getting shot at, as well as providing an increased armor rating and additional radar scans, and this is going to be more beneficial to you on the bot front in reducing flinch from enemy fire, which can be annoying to deal with, and it is also nice that you do get a little armor boost with this, because in order to actually be utilizing this perk, you do have to be taking damage, but really I just don't feel like this has a ton of impact. I feel like there's so many armors that I would rather have. Even something like extra padding, it just seems like an overall better option, and so overall this Warbond does have some good things, but it's just nothing is being added that's a game changer, and a lot of it just ends up staying on the shelf untouched, so this is going to get a C from me. But the next one suffers from a similar fate, and it really pains me because this first ever legendary Warbond just doesn't feel too legendary. We have the ODST Halo Crossover Warbond. Now, from a theming perspective, this one is awesome. This also marks a major turning point in this game, as this Warbond helped usher in our Xbox Warriors and basically has ended the console war once and for all. This is awesome for the Halo fans, but I will say it leaves some to be desired from a combat perspective. The MA5C assault rifle is perhaps the coolest weapon in this Warbond because it gives us a medium armor penetrating assault rifle, which does some decent damage to the enemies, but it also has a cool first-person perspective, which makes you feel like you're actually playing Halo, and this also lets you see how much ammo you have left in your mag, as well as a compass pointing north. The compass part is a bit pointless unless you were going HUDless, but the ammo count can be nice, especially if you want to leave a bullet in for a faster reload. You also have the M7S SMG, which is a light armor penetrating SMG with a silencer attached, but it's not really anything special. Like, it's perhaps most similar to the MP Knight, but it can't be modded at all to have a lower recoil or a higher capacity. And the silencer doesn't feel like it actually works very well. Like, here I shoot an enemy from a distance and he pretty much immediately knows where I am, and his whole group immediately paths towards me. You have the M90A shotgun, which is notable for its super high damage, and that completely destroys enemies as well as staggers them back nicely, but it has a lower capacity than similar guns like the Punisher, which does do less damage but has 10 more shots and is free. And then you have the M6C SOCOM pistol secondary, which has good damage and is also suppressed, but it suffers from the same deal as the SMG, with suppression not seeming to be that great, and it doesn't have a scope to even try to pick off enemies from too far away, which I would kind of like to do with a suppressor. Generally, while these weapons are good, there are free guns available from the Helldivers Mobilized Warbond that are similar enough to these that it really makes it hard for any one of these to stand out as must-haves, as well as the fact that none of them can be modified. But the armor passive Feet First does carry this Warbond a little bit, because unlike most armor passives, you can't actually get a version of this from the superstore. This passive is pretty decent and special. It's pretty good for stealth because it makes you less noisy when moving, allowing you to get closer to enemies while being undetected, and also pairs nicely with its ability to detect POIs from farther away distances, and that can make you a pretty good scout for your team. But what I like most is the full immunity to leg injuries here, because leg injuries can often be annoying to deal with, causing you to limp slowly and require an immediate use of a stim in order to make it out alive. I can't tell you how many times I have broken my leg and I don't have a stim, so I basically have to give up. But here I can be in a similar situation and just keep moving, and that increases the survivability of this quite a bit. I do wish there was a light armor option for this for better stealth and scouting, but it's still solid. Overall though, as a Warbond, it's tough to give this a very good rating. The weapons don't feel like they're adding too much, and while the passive is great, you also have to consider the pricing on this. As a legendary Warbond, you will also need to shell out an additional 500 super credits, and it definitely doesn't feel like you're getting enough value from a gameplay perspective. This is C tier. But the next Warbond on this list is one I used to deem the worst, but it has risen a little bit, and that is the Viper Commandos. Now this Warbond does have some good to it, but there is also some bad, and generally I find that it doesn't offer a lot of urgent value to it. A lot of people disagree with me here, but let me explain. First, let's talk about the worst part about this, the throwing knives, which is stylish and meant to be a stealth weapon, allowing for silent takedowns, but in practice it really falls flat and it's pretty weak. And also the crosshair on this is pretty misaligned, so you have to get used to throwing this well. The coolest thing about this is it can one-shot headshot overseers, but that's about it. You also have the Bushwhacker shotgun sidearm, providing you with a pocket shotgun with a lot of stagger and having the ability to mod it to release all 3 bullets at once or one at a time. But really this kind of performs as a bit of a mid-tier sidearm. It's good at providing some backup for light armor enemies, but it's not super great, and it's really annoying having to reload this all the time. Now, the main reason this has risen from being one of the worst Warbonds is because, well, worst Warbonds have been added after this, but also because of the addition of modifications, which has been quite nice here. The one primary weapon in this, the AR-23A carbine, has benefited amazingly from modifications, being able to counter a lot of its previous downsides. As a default, this had high recoil, but you can now drastically reduce that, such that you can really improve its effective range. And you can also drop a drum magazine on top of this, basically giving you a mini version of a stalwart. This can be especially great versus the bugs and the squids. And unfortunately, a lot of weapons in this game don't seem to be utilizing the weapon customizations to the fullest extent, but in the case of the carbine, this definitely is. Now, that isn't all that's good about this Warbond, but there are some caveats to the other good things which I feel make this a lower priority pickup. The experimental infusion booster, which gives you enhanced stim effects and duration, is actually probably the best booster out of all the premium Warbonds, and often sits in that 4th slot, being the 4th best to equip after the big 3 that comes from the free Helldivers Mobilized Warbond. But boosters are shared, so as long as one person on your team has this Warbond, you don't have to be the one. And to me, that drastically reduces the urgency of this, but I know many may disagree. Another great standout here is the Peak Physique armor passive, which grants you double melee damage, as well as increased increased ergonomics, which can really help with some of the heavier weapons, allowing you to snap to target easier. Now, this is a pretty amazing S tier armor passive, but you can also get this armor passive from the Superstore, and actually the Jaguar armor set from the Superstore is perhaps the best version of this, being a medium armor variant, while the Warbond has light and heavy only. All in all, this does have some great stuff going for it, but a lot of that greatness can be gotten in other ways, and so it's not as urgent of a pickup in my opinion. I'm gonna give this a C. But next, let's take a trip down to the wild, wild west. Yee-hoo! Where we'll be discussing the Borderline Justice. And this Warbond is good, but I wouldn't say it's exceptional. You have the R6 Deadeye Marksman Rifle, which is a lever action marksman rifle with medium armor penetration. It does a good bit of damage and stagger, and while it's not that great for the bugs, it can be pretty great for the bots, and it can one-shot headshot overseers. You also have the Laz 58 Talon, which is a laser revolver with infinite ammo, good medium armor damage, and even a decent fire rate. This thing cools down pretty fast too, allowing for either quick bursts of fire or slow sustained fire that can last forever. And truly, this is one of the most trusty sidearms you can have. You also have the TED 63 Dynamite, which releases a high damage and widespread explosion after a variable timer. It can be timed to release at 5 seconds, 15 seconds, or a minute. And while this does have decent damage, the 5-second timer is longer than most, and there aren't really a ton of good reasons to want to delay that fuse even more, especially by a whole minute unless you are going for stealth. You also have the Gunslinger armor, which gives your sidearms increased reload speed, holster speed, and reduced recoil, and that's nice, but really it's only going to be worth it if your loadout is really built around you maining your sidearm, and even then it's debatable if that's the best thing for you. The sample extricator booster here is just okay. It grants you a chance of an extra sample for killing larger enemies, and that can be good for newer players on that sample grind, but honestly, being capped at 10 and having a hard time even finding these when they do drop makes this feel pretty weak. Not to mention, once you do get all your ship modules unlocked, there isn't really much reason to use that besides the DSS. What really propels this Warbond higher on this list, literally, is the Lift 860 Hover Pack, which is a jump pack variant, essentially giving you more vertical lift and allowing you to hover for a time with low mobility before descending. And I absolutely love this backpack as it allows you to reach new and often safe heights or pop your head up over some cover for an attack. It's really useful for getting a good vantage point or escaping a dicey situation, although sometimes it can leave you like a sitting duck up in the air, so just be wary of that. This is all great, but I don't think this makes it a top tier Warbond. Instead, I think this has a solid footing as a B. But perhaps the Wild West isn't for you. Perhaps you will feel more comfortable with the city folk. But not to worry, because the next Warbond is the Urban Legends. And this one is interesting because it does not come with a primary and instead offers 3 different stratagems. The first, and perhaps my least favorite, is the Directional Shield, which is almost a mix between the Personal Shield and the Ballistic Shield in that it provides you with a rechargeable shield that protects you from the front and can be used alongside one-handed weapons and secondaries. It's a good way to provide yourself some protection while firing and can allow you to advance, so it's nice, but it's just not my favorite, and I don't think it's totally necessary. The Flame Sentry also comes with this, which honestly is amazing on both the bug and the squid fronts, being able to just eviscerate enemies and lighting the ground on fire to keep the damage going. I do find this to be a top stratagem to take on both of these fronts. But this also has the anti-tank emplacement, which is this awesome stationary Helldiver controlled turret that you can aim from far away and just blow heavy enemies up with ease. This really is great on all fronts, but it tends to have its biggest standout on the bot front, being something that you can just completely destroy fortresses and hotspots from so far away. And this also is one of the best ways in order to take down a Leviathan. This also includes the Stun Lance as a secondary weapon, which was one of our first ever melee weapons introduced in this game. This stuns enemies for a good while and hurts them as well, but I just don't think it's the strongest. I certainly welcome the uniqueness of this weapon and how this has opened the door for us to be getting more melee weapons, but I still don't think melee is where it needs to be in order for this to be an amazing pickup. You also have the armed resupply booster here, which actually turns your resupply hellpods into a mini sentry, having a gun on top to finish off a few enemies, and that can be very helpful, as especially when you need supplies, this can provide you some cover as you stock up. But the true standout of this Warbond is the Siege Ready Armor passive, which provides you with more mags for all your weapons and a faster reload pattern for your primaries, and this honestly is one of the best passives in this game for how much extra benefit it provides you, and that may be reason to pick this up, although you can also buy this armor from the Superstore as well, and that's why I decided to move this a little bit further down in terms of priority as I have in the past. That plus not having a primary kind of ends up putting this as a B. But the next Warbond we have has some pretty hot items, and that is the Freedom's Flame. Now this Warbond is interesting because it brings with it a lot of fire stuff for our crazy pyromaniacs. You have the Torture primary, which is a primary version of the flamethrower, and this is nice for dealing with the bugs, and you can also rack up some pretty big numbers on the squid front. You also have the Crisper sidearm, which is amazing and one of the best sidearms in the game versus the bugs and the squids. Not to be forgotten is the Cookout shotgun, which deals all this fire damage and stagger to enemies. It's definitely an S tier versus the bugs and the squids. Now I will say though, I don't think any of these weapons are really good for the bots. In fact, they pretty much suck versus them. But the ability they do have versus the bugs and the squids are almost unmatched, able to rack up some huge numbers for you. This also does include the inflammable fire resistant armor, which can be good for keeping you safer while being a complete and total pyromaniac, but it's also very useful for the fire brigade on the bot front, as those bots have fire weapons, as well as for resisting the fire breath of the dragon roach. I also think having this armor passive is pretty much a must-have if you want to wield the Laz 17 double-edged sickle, as it greatly reduces the fire damage that will inflict. You do have options for this armor passive though in the Superstore, so while I think this is useful, I can't give it too many points for it. The biggest downside of this is its pretty horrible booster, which is the Firebomb, and this booster actually can make things worse for you. This booster allows any Hell pod to bring a fiery explosive blast wherever it lands, and while I think that was meant to be a cool way to weaponize your Hell pods, what often ends up happening is you create a bunch of chaos around you where your teammates end up accidentally killing themselves or needing to dodge fire all the time. Perhaps a simple fix to this would just be to have it not apply to resupplies or support weapons. To me, this Warbond's main value is providing you with a good deal of fire options that can promote some good loadout diversity, but there are a lot of other flame options available from both other Warbonds as well as for free, and as I did say, the armor passive can be found in the Superstore, so I just don't see this as a super high priority. For all that, I'm going to give this a B. But let's move on to the next Warbond, the Polar Patriots Warbond. Now, from here on out, I'm going to be honest, this was extremely hard to weigh some of these Warbonds. And it's not because the rest of the Warbonds are perfect, rather it's because you have a good number of Warbonds that are mostly well-rounded with a lot of good stuff in them, and then you have these other Warbonds which have a good number of things that are kind of mid, but one or two things that feel like complete must-haves. In the case with the Polar Patriots, we're dealing a little bit more with a well-rounded Warbond. Starting off with the least interesting part of this Warbond is the armor, which doesn't offer anything unique that you can't get elsewhere, although each of the three armor sets do offer something different, with the Scout, Fortified, and Servo Assisted being here, so at least there's some variety. The booster isn't too amazing either. Motivational Shocks is meant to lower the recovery time it takes when the slow effect is applied to you from an enemy, and well, it can help versus the bugs, but not so much on the other two fronts. Basically, it's an okay booster, but it's hard to notice its effects, and it definitely doesn't crack the top 4. But let's get to the guns where this Warbond does start to shine. The Tenderizer is a really good assault rifle, offering you a lot of damage per bullet and low recoil as well as different fire rates. It fares amazingly versus the bugs and is pretty decent versus the squids, but it does struggle a little bit on the bot front as it is only light armor penetrating, but at least it's accurate so you can get those weak spots a little easier with this. This also includes the SMG Pummeler, which fires out stun rounds, and I actually do like this quite a bit for the squids as well as versus stalkers on the bug front, utilizing that stun ability, and you can also modify this to have a drum magazine. This definitely isn't considered the best, but it's at least a unique option. The Verdict sidearm here can't be forgotten as it is a solid medium armor penetrating secondary, which can one-shot headshot Devastator heads and allows you to carry a light armor weapon knowing you at least have something with medium armor. The impact in incendiary throwable is also in here, and this is pretty amazing versus the bug and squid hordes, creating a fiery explosion upon impact that stays on the ground and burns the enemies. Perhaps though the greatest part of this warbond is the purifier, which is this amazing and versatile plasma gun which allows you to shoot either charged up blasts or fast firing plasma shots with less damage. And this absolutely melts enemies, notably killing chargers super fast on the bug front and dealing with the Voltless horde on the squid front, and in my opinion is just absolutely the best thing you can have with you on the bot front, taking on everything with ease. You could argue this is maybe a must-have weapon, and perhaps this warbond should be higher for that reason, but my main justification is that you can get pretty close to the strength of this if you just grind for the Scorcher for free in the Helldivers Mobilized Warbond. Scorcher is less versatile, but it's still pretty darn close to the effectiveness of this, so I think that makes this less urgent of a pickup. Ultimately though, this warbond is amazing, in particular with the tenderizer, the incendiary impacts, and the purifier, so this is gonna get an A from me. But let's see what ends up winning out over this, and that is the Dust Devils Warbond. And this is sort of a Dune type theme warbond, and I think it does have a lot of uniqueness to it, but nothing that I feel like is a total must-have. Although you might argue that what I think is the best part of this warbond is a must-have, and that is the AR-2 Coyote Assault Rifle. Now, up until this point, assault rifles have not quite felt like they're at the same level as a lot of the other guns in this game. Like, you can argue that maybe a fully modified carbine can be an S tier on something like the Squid Front, but no assault rifles have really felt super powerful and like almost overall S tier weapons. Until now with the Coyote. This is an incendiary assault rifle where it has bullets that provide fire damage to the enemies. It's also medium armor penetrating. It's got a pretty decent mag size and it does have recoil, but that can be modified down. On the battlefield, this is just amazing, especially on the bug front, being able to one-shot a lot of the smaller enemies, including warriors, which might even tempt you to put this in semi mode in order to save bullets. This also is great for the Illuminate, just being able to spray and mow these guys down, and it's not too bad on the bot front either with its medium armor penetration. This is able to do some decent damage and give that extra damage over time effect to the enemies, and that just makes this feel so good to use. This is an amazing high tier assault rifle that I really hope they don't nerf, and honestly could be reason enough to pick this up. But you also have some really interesting stratagems that come with this as well. You have the S11 spear gun, which is this heavy armor piercing weapon which you can use to snipe at the enemies, and once you pierce them, a gas cloud is released, being able to confuse, damage, and disorient the enemies around them. And what I like to do with this is I like to fire one of these at one of the biggest enemies in a clump, providing good damage to them while being able to confuse the rest. This also can one-shot a Hulk if you hit it in the eye, and it generally just feels very fun to use. Although I will say, I think it's a little bit more fun than super powerful. Kind of makes you feel like a big enemy hunter, and I like that, but it's not going to feel like a super OP support weapon. Now you also have the EAT 700 expendable napalm, which drops down an EAT, but this time with a napalm launcher. And unlike the EAT, which typically was good for large single targets, this can actually be used to help deal with clumps of enemies, but it actually will do some decent damage to bigger enemies as well. And this even has the capability to one-shot a dragon roach pretty consistently, feels like, and that makes this perhaps the strongest support weapon versus these guys. You also get 2 of these with each drop, and it's a pretty short cooldown, although a little bit longer than the normal EAT. Now, another very unique one with this warbond is the MS-11 solo silo, and what this does is it plants a missile into the ground and gives you a laser pointer which you can point at things, telling the missile where to launch. And this does a lot of damage, being able to one-shot a lot of the biggest enemies in this game very nicely. Although perhaps somewhat disappointingly, it can't be used for things like stratagem jammers. Another downside to this is that you can't really plant this near enemies because they will seek it out and destroy the missile so that you can't use it. So it's really best to try to hide it somewhere in a safe location so that when you're ready to fire on something, it will still be around to help you. A couple more downsides are I don't really enjoy the scope on the laser pointer, and the cooldown time feels a little bit long, especially when enemies do get aggroed to it pretty quickly. They end up taking it down and you kind of just waste your whole stratagem. Now, while there are some pretty solid options with this Warbond, there are some things here that I am much less of a fan of. You have the Desert Stormer armor passive, which provides 40% reduction to acid, gas, flame, and electricity damage, as well as increased throwing range. But I feel like with that low reduction value that this offers, it means you don't really end up feeling it that much. This is even lower than the Acclimated armor passive, which was available with the Killzone collaboration. I have heard it may reappear again as its own Warbond one day, but the Acclimated perk actually provided 50% resistance, and even that I didn't feel like was strong enough to reduce a lot of these damage types. And you really only want to take an armor passive like this if you're expecting to encounter multiple different types of this damage in a mission. Like, I thought this would be good versus the Dragon Roach, which spews acid and fire at the same time, but actually the inflammable armor passive seems to be doing a much better job of protecting you. And also, I don't think this does really well versus arc damage. Even with the heavy option, I was getting one shot by things like Tesla towers, making it seem kind of pointless. This Warbond also has the G7 pineapple, which is odd to me, not because it's named after a fruit, but more that this just doesn't seem strong at all. And they only give you 3 of these, which implies that the devs actually think that this is super strong. I mean, you get 3 thermites, for instance, which is one of the best throwables in the game and can take down some of the biggest enemies. But this is light armor penetrating. That means it's not going to really do anything versus the more elite enemies, and while it does do some nice splash damage to the smaller enemies, especially with its shrapnel, the impact isn't that much more noticeable than any of the other basic throwables, and I would almost pick anything else over this. Overall, I do like this Warbond for how unique each item is in here, and especially for the Coyote, so I'm going to give it an A. But the next one was a huge struggle for me in trying to figure out which order I should place this, and that is the Control Group Warbond. Now this also has some pretty unique items, but it also has perhaps one of the biggest game changers in here that is arguably a must-have. The theme of this is largely around experimentation, and as a result, you have a lot of items in this that have some good power, but also have some risk of causing things to go haywire. You have the VG70 variable, which is a special weapon that gives you a ton of different modification options. You can use this as an assault rifle with various RPMs. You can use this as a high-powered single-shot rifle with its volley mode, or you can just unload all the ammo in one blast, causing you to fly backwards. That one is a little bit of a gimmick, but it could potentially serve you well versus a big guy. The only issue really is that this is light armor penetrating, so even the more powerful blast is not the most useful, as there aren't many enemies that you would want to unload this on that have a lot of light armor. This rifle is decent, but it's just not the best. You also have the Plas 45 Epoch in here, which is our first ever plasma support weapon, which has its own risk reward. The longer you hold it down, the more damage it will do, but eventually it will blow up in your face. You have to learn to time this well using visual and audio cues, and if you can do some serious damage, but it's still kind of a middle of the road support weapon. So far, not so amazing for this Warbond, but things do get better. The armor passive here is the Adrenal Defibrillator, which actually allows you to extend your life. After you die, you get resuscitated for a short time, allowing for you to have a bit of a final stand, including being able to stim yourself to stay up longer, which by the way, those stims do last a little bit longer, as well as giving you a little bit of arc damage reduction. And all that can be great for allowing you to put up a final fight, unloading all your ammo because you're going to lose it anyways, or perhaps finish the last part of an objective so that you can move on to another location. Or what I like to do is utilizing this with a portable hell bomb so that if the enemies kill you, you can get the sweetest revenge. This is a pretty unique one that I really like, although I will say the arc reduction doesn't really feel like it does too much. Now you also have the A-Laz-98 Laser Sentry, which is pretty cool. It shoots laser damage onto the enemies, catching them on fire, and theoretically it does have infinite ammo, although if it does overheat, you will lose it. But I will say it doesn't feel significantly better or too different from the free machine gun sentry, which has a shorter cooldown time. The G31 arc throwable is actually really good. If you throw this down, it will provide pulsing arc damage to the enemies around it, and then it will bounce and do it again, attacking wherever it's landed. This can wreak havoc on a lot of enemies, or actually also yourself if you aren't careful. Overall, a pretty nice and solid throwable for the Horde. Now, all of that is nice, but it's not really enough to make this feel like more than a B. But that all changes with the one item that we haven't covered yet, the Warp Pack. This backpack is an absolute game changer. What it does is it allows you to warp short distances, including through objects, which can make you feel super OP. You can warp through walls, you can warp through friendship doors, you can even warp through enemies, and as long as they're small enough, you will completely take them out. You can warp to escape dicey situations, and you can even do it twice in a row, although if you do a second warp, you will take a little bit of damage, and you can do it 3 times in a row, although if you do so, it will explode and you will lose your warp pack, so don't do that. Generally, this backpack just provides you with so much survival capabilities. It allows you to dodge the enemies and avoid their attacks. It allows you to traverse the map and get away from danger much quicker. There's just so much benefit from this one item that it was really hard for me to weigh this Warbond as a whole. I do see this is a pretty urgent pickup, although you can get away with some similar benefits with something like the jump pack, so I can't really put it any higher. But this one item alone does a lot of the heavy lifting here, helping you a lot with your survivability, so I'm going to give this an A. Now, the next Warbond is a bit similar for me in that there is one item here that really carries this, and that is the Servants of Freedom Warbond. Now this one is interesting because essentially it is filled with some high risk, high reward items that remind you that protecting a democracy does require sacrifice. Starting, we have the Laz 17 double-edged sickle, which is a sickle variant without a fire limit that winds up and does progressively more damage and armor penetration over time, starting from light armor and going all the way to heavy armor, for the trade-off that this will cause self-inflicting damage to yourself the longer you hold it down, eventually catching you on fire. And well, the thing is, this technically does have a fire limit, and that is the amount of health that you have, but you can increase your resistance to damage if you have something like the inflammable armor passive to help with that flame damage, as well as the vitality booster. And if you do want to have this gun, it kind of forces you to have both of those things if you want to make good use of this. That can be a bit of a hefty price to pay, especially as it does require you to own the inflammable armor passive, which you'd need to get from either the Freedom's Flame Warbond or from the Superstore. But ultimately, I do think this is a pretty decent gun, especially on the bot front, where I feel that this drastically outshines the sickle because of its ability to do medium armor penetration. Although it does require you to go through a lot of stims, so you just have to really get used to that. Now you also have the integrated explosive armor, which gives you some extra explosives, but also turns you into an explosive that will trigger upon death, and that can wreak a lot of havoc when dealing with the Horde. This does kind of rely on you dying though, and it can also put your own team at risk should you be close to another, so there's a good bit of risk reward with this one. There also is the B100 portable Hellbomb stratagem, which is a backpack that you can trigger a timer on to set off a huge explosion. Now this can do a lot of damage, but the risk is you do need to physically travel to where you plan to explode this, so you're putting yourself at a lot of risk. This is a great pick though if you're trying to deal with things like stratagem jammers or anything that typically requires calling down a Hellbomb, as the time to call it down and key in the buttons can be quite difficult in the heat of things. Now perhaps the item that requires the least personal sacrifice is the G50 Seeker, which is a throwable which will automatically target enemies for you, and it will prioritize the ones you mark, although I have found it's not always super reliable. I really like using this for the gunships, and it's also just nice to know that when you throw this, it's going to hit a target and take something out. But what really makes this a high priority pickup is really the Ultimatum sidearm, which is basically a pocket stratagem in your secondary slot. This gives you a ton of damage that can one-shot the most elite enemies, as well as do things like close Bile Titan bug holes and one-shot spaceships. The trade-off here is its short range and its low ammo count, but you can fire this farther in a couple of ways, like by swapping to your primary and back before firing, or just diving while shooting. Initially, I didn't think this was going to be such a critical item that was so important, but I have been finding that I just have this on my loadout so often. It's really nice, basically feeling like you have a 5th stratagem slot, especially because it occupies a part of your loadout that sometimes doesn't get a whole lot of use, and I really like the abnormally high damage capabilities that this has to offer. Your secondary slot just often doesn't have a complete game changer in it, but now it can with the Ultimatum, and for this item alone, I do think this is a higher priority pickup, so I will give this an A. But the next Warbond has a few really solid options to it that make it a really good all-around choice, and that is the Steeled Veterans Warbond. Now, perhaps the worst part about this Warbond is the booster, which lowers your reinforcement cooldown time, and that kind of relies on you planning to exhaust all your lives in a mission, and doesn't really help you out until you've gotten to that point. Things move a little bit up from here though. You have the servo assisted armor passive, which is not the strongest in my opinion, but it offers longer throws of stratagems and throwables, as well as increased limb health, and overall it's kind of nicer because it means you can be a little bit further away from where you're throwing things, as well as having somewhat of similar benefits to the armor passive from the ODST Warbond. You also have the incendiary grenade here, which is pretty good. It does have a fuse, but does cover a good area with fire and is really good for the bugs and the squids. But I think what really brings great value to this Warbond are the weapons. The Liberator Concussive is not the strongest, but I do think it's pretty underrated. It's really good against the super aggressive bugs, especially the Predator strain, as the stagger on this can really hold them back and really can hold a lot of the horde back. It also pairs very nicely with the throwable here. You also have the Breaker Incendiary Shotgun, which is absolutely amazing and a great weapon to take out versus the bugs and the squids. This is a shotgun that fires off a burst of incendiary rounds, and while the cookout may be better, this is pretty close. You also have the Jar Dominator, which can dominate on any front, but I think especially this excels on the bot front, killing everything quickly with a lot of stagger and damage. And you have the Senator Sidearm, which I do believe is kind of a must-have on the bot front, as it shoots heavy armor penetrating shots into enemies and can take down things like Striders and Hulks pretty easily. The Senator is also pretty amazing on the squid front, being able to one-shot headshot Overseers, and it can even take down Harvesters. And so what I really like about this is going to add a lot of really solid and strong weapons into your arsenal that can really cover a lot of your bases here, being quite amazing on any front. So I'm going to give this an A. But the next Warbond we have is pretty similar in value, but I do think edges out the Steel Veterans a little bit because I think it's more friendly to newer players, and that is the Cutting Edge Warbond. And what I like about this is this offers some nice variety and very interesting and unique energy weapons. You have the Sickle, which is an assault rifle that is actually one of the best weapons for the squid front, being very good for shields and having infinite ammo for the horde. I don't like it so much for the bugs, but I do think it can be a decent light armor penetrating option for the bots, allowing you to get used to hitting those weak spots while having infinite ammo to take some of that pressure off. Now you also have the Plasma Punisher, which is basically a plasma grenade launcher that doesn't close bug holes but will stagger and wreck clumps of enemies. This is really solid on all three fronts, is one of my favorite weapons in the game. And then you also have the Arc Blitzer, again another very unique and an S tier weapon with infinite ammo that releases electric bolts to enemies with a lot of stagger, allowing you to damage and control multiple enemies at once, and you can just hold the fire button down and it will keep going. This is definitely a solid S tier weapon for both the bugs and the squids, and it's not a bad option for the bots either. You also have the Las Dagger in here, and this is a decent laser beam sidearm that can catch enemies on fire and just feels like the epitome of a great backup for you, especially in that it does have infinite ammo. What's also great here is the Stun Grenade, which is a very strong grenade, and what it does is it freezes enemies for a while so that you can have your way with them. It's especially great for the Hulks, allowing you to get around at their back, and I do think this is really good for newer players too, because it allows you to freeze enemies and gives you a little bit of a chance to figure out their weak spots and slow things down a bit. Now the armor passive here is unique, but it's not the strongest, although with the squids it does have some extra good use. The electrical conduit armor provides strong resistance to arc damage, which for the most part is only useful against your own Tesla towers and accidentals with arc weapons, so it may not be totally useful in a lot of scenarios, but unlike a lot of the other armor passives that claim to have arc resistance, this actually does do a pretty good job. And this is also pretty useful versus the Illuminate, as this faction actually dishes out arc damage of its own from the Harvesters, the Watchers, as well as their own Tesla towers. So this can be a great option if you want to engage on that front. Now you also have the Localization Confusion Booster. It's not something too great, but at least is one of the more useful boosters in that it can give you some breathing room in between bug breaches and bot drops. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference, and again I don't see this used too often, but it still ranks ranks a bit higher in the booster category. Overall, this is a great Warbond, and I think this can add a lot of variety to your arsenal, and it has something strong to help you out on all fronts. And especially when I think about newer players starting to get Warbonds for the first time, this is going to add 3 very different guns to your arsenal where you may not have that variety just yet. And these guns are going to be pretty easy to use, especially with a lot of these having infinite ammo and the blitzer, which you can hold down for a lot of auto shocks. And so for that reason, I do think this deserves an A. But the next Warbond we have is super interesting because if you have seen my first ever Warbond ranking video, you would know that I actually put this in the poop hater category, but now I definitely don't feel that way. And we are talking about the Chemical Agents Warbond. Now, this is themed largely around the gas mechanic. Gas can cause enemies to be confused, take corrosive damage, and even attack each other instead of you. And while it once felt a little bit more like a niche effect, I think this mechanic has become more and more necessary to have with you on your loadouts, especially with the hardest content in the game, and this Warbond will give you some great options. Perhaps the worst of these is the Sterilizer, which is a stratagem that's kind of like the flamethrower, only it releases gas, and this can be nice mostly on the bug and the squid fronts for getting those respective hordes off your back, but it does require you to be focusing your fire, which I find isn't really the best use of this mechanic. Instead, you want to have options that kind of do this for you, allowing you to be focused on doing damage. And that's where the Guard Dog Dog Breath stratagem comes into play. This is a drone backpack that flies around spraying gas on the enemies that are near you. And really, this one item is the main reason I rank this so highly, because this keeps even the most aggressive enemies off your back, allowing you to focus on firing and killing. And from a newer player's perspective, this alone opens up so much for you, allowing you to engage with some of the hardest content in the game, which often is the newest content that's added to the game. The Predator strain, for instance, which can be so annoying to deal with, are not as much of a problem when you have this thing equipped, because the gas just keeps them from aggressively attacking you. And it often makes the Guard Dog Dog Breath stratagem feel like a requirement on super hard missions, at least while you're still kind of getting the hang of things. But this Warbond also has one of the strongest grenades in the game, the gas grenade, which emits a big gas cloud, confusing and damaging a bunch of enemies within it, as well as being able to close bug holes, destroy bot fabricators, and get spaceships from their holes. It's super useful and definitely an S tier. This also includes the stim pistol, which is pretty decent here. It serves as a good team play item, being able to provide mini stims to your teammates, and I do hope they add more team play items like this. I think it's pretty unique. And then you have the advanced filtration armor passive, which I don't think is that great. It does protect you from gas and is especially good with the vitality booster, but you really have to be planning to be in gas a lot, and I often feel like you're better off with something like the medic armor passive if that's what you're going to be doing. Now, before, I wouldn't mark this Warbond as highly, and I can at times be a little bit torn on this decision, but ultimately, if I think I were starting over from scratch and I was relatively new to this game, I would find it pretty urgent to open up this gas mechanic to myself, giving me a good number of loadout options, as well as with the Guard Dog. It's just like having good training wheels for this game, letting you engage with more difficult combat scenarios than you otherwise would be able to, and letting you fight distracted enemies, getting used to their weak spots and mechanics. I just think about all the times new content has been dropped on this game, and while I'm trying to get used to it, I'm putting this backpack on. It just feels like something you do need to get pretty quickly. I wouldn't give this an S tier because I do think it doesn't have as much items as some of the other ones, but this is definitely a high A for sure. But the next Warbond we have doesn't only have must-have items, it also has a good all-around offering that clearly sets it apart from the rest, and that is the Democratic Detonation Warbond. Now, there are a lot of reasons this one is ranked so high. For one, this has the Thermite Throwable, which are these anti-tank sticky bombs that do a lot of damage, especially being able to take out hulks and chargers with ease, making them pretty much a non-issue, as well as spaceships in a single toss. And honestly, whenever this game adds any new threat, you can be pretty sure that a thermite grenade is going to be a super easy way to take them down. And really, I think this is the strongest throwable in the whole game. You also have some decent armor sets on here, although not unique to this Warbond alone. You have the Fortified and the Engineering Kit armor sets, which I think are two of the best armor passives in this game. The Engineering Kit providing extra throwables, which can be great for the Thermites, since you typically only get 3. And the Fortified provides explosive resistance, which is very helpful on all 3 fronts, as well as helping protect you from your own explosives. And both of these armor passives also reduce your recoil, and that especially pairs well with the assault rifle, especially in this Warbond, the Adjudicator, which is a pretty strong assault rifle dealing out high medium armor penetrating damage, and it does have a good bit of recoil, but that can be modified down. This is pretty good on all 3 fronts, using as an assault rifle versus the bugs and the squids, or putting on semi mode to use as a marksman rifle for the bots. This does have a little bit of a lower capacity, which isn't the best, and it does definitely lose some footing now that the Coyote is here, but it's still pretty solid. But what really sets this Warbond apart are the explosive weapons here, especially as explosive weapons really are arguably the strongest weapon type in this entire game. You have the Eruptor, which is a heavy bolt action explosive sniper rifle which sends shrapnel through the air, and this is effective on all fronts, dealing high damage to stronger enemies and splash damage to the hordes, as well as with its heavy armor penetration being able to take down hulks from the front. This also has utility functions, being able to close bug holes, destroy bot fabricators, and blow up spaceships when the shields are down. Now it does have a downside in its heaviness, which does give it some bad ergonomics, but that can now be modified as well as paired with something like the Peak Physique perk. This does have a little bit of a slower fire rate, so if you want an explosive primary that's a little bit faster, you could opt for the crossbow, which is also great and in my opinion an S tier on all 3 fronts. This provides a lot of stagger and splash damage with its explosive bolts, and again being able to perform the utility functions but firing faster such that the damage keeps coming. But if you don't want an explosive primary, you also have the option to have it in your sidearm slot with the grenade pistol, which dishes out nice explosive shots to enemies as well as having that same utility function. And the benefit of having all these explosive options here is it really can open up your loadout options quite a bit, allowing you especially to take more advantage of other throwables and stratagems. I feel like you should always have something explosive on your loadout, not just for the utility function, but also for how effective it is versus nearly every enemy in this game. And so being able to have something in your primary or secondary slot really allows you to feel safer going with other types of support weapons or stratagems or throwables, and it really just opens up a lot of possibilities for you. Now I also can't forget the expert extraction booster included here, which lowers the amount of time it takes to extract, and I think this can be decent and at least can help you extract faster, especially being a little bit more successful with extractions and get more samples too, as you don't have to wait as long fighting waves and waves of enemies at the extraction point. And so for all these reasons, the Democratic Detonation Warbond would definitely be the first Warbond that I would unlock for all that it has to offer and for all that it can do to help you have an enjoyable experience. And so yes, this gets an S tier from me. And so here we have our list. This is where all the premium and legendary Warbonds stand, and this is the order that I think you should get them in. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think and where you would rank these down in the comments below. And check out my exhaustive list of things that I wish I knew sooner in Helldivers 2. Thank you to my members for supporting the Bowel Movement, but otherwise, so long, Pooper Troopers.